So, welcome to The Raise. I'm your host, Jade, and I'm really excited to be here with our guest today, Dr. Dupe Burgess, the founder of Bloomful, which is a platform that delivers digital, holistic, and therapeutic support for women's gynecological conditions. So, today we'll be talking about the funding round that Dupe and her team have recently closed and learn more about their experiences, also of kind of like non-traditional funding sources that founders may want to consider. Dupe, welcome to the Raise, and thank you for joining us today because I know that things are super busy on your end.
Thank you for having me, Jade. Really happy to be here.
No, it's great having you, and I think one of the things that we'd love to start with is if you can tell us a bit more about your background, and why you started Bloomful in the first place.
Absolutely. Okay, so as you say, I'm the founder of Bloomful. We have been operating for the last couple of years. By background, I'm a doctor. So I trained in London. I came to London for university, worked in the National Health Service here for 7 years altogether. And really, I saw the problem around women's health when I was working as a doctor. I could see that there were definite barriers to accessing specific types of care, especially for specific types of women within our current pathways. And that always bothered me, especially when I was working in primary care in a GP practice. I kind of went about my business being a doctor, and eventually I did decide to leave medicine because I felt disillusioned with the system. It's not the best working environment. I felt like I had more to give the world. I wanted to offer help on a bigger scale. There was a lot I wanted to learn, and I felt kind of constricted within medicine in terms of the actual, the current setup of how you progress through that career. And so after a lot of soul searching, I did decide to leave, which was a really big decision, especially when you put so much time and effort into that career and it's been part of your life for such a long time, But I managed to make the transition, and I worked in the city for a company called the Boston Consulting Group, who are a global consulting firm, many offices around the world, and I managed to get a role as a consultant there for a few years. So that was a great experience because I was able to really just understand how the world works outside of the medical bubble, build my own toolkit in terms of, being able to do a financial model or do a P&L or just like learning how to present to board members and all of that kind of thing. And that was really valuable for me, actually. But also just learning about how healthcare works. I did a lot of projects within the healthcare space, and I guess that just gave me the understanding of how to solve problems within healthcare. And after a few years of BCG, I realized that actually I did want to be doing something that was more impactful, something a bit more mission driven. And so I decided to leave and start my own venture and really revisit the problem that I had seen as a doctor around women's health. And, I had more confidence in learning and figuring out how to solve it. So, that's when Bloomful was born. And we've been going ever since.
I mean, that's amazing to hear, and also I think a lot of people don't realize how much your past plays a role in getting you to where you are now. You had such a long career as a doctor, and then you moved on to consulting, and it looks like both of those played a huge part in preparing you for being the founder of Bloomful as well.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I always say I don't know if I could have done the shift directly from medicine to this. I definitely needed something in the middle. Help me just understand the ways of the world. Medicine is a real bubble. Like you're very deep on that, but not necessarily very, cognizant of everything else. So I definitely needed that step. And I agree that it's definitely been a situation where I've brought those two parts of my background together in order for me to do what I'm doing now.
No, that's really amazing to hear, and it sounds like Bloomful's doing some incredible things for women in the healthcare space, especially given that often, women are misdiagnosed or overlooked, and the things and the problems they can come across. Some women carry them for years and years and years without understanding what it is that's happening with their bodies. So it must be really fulfilling to know that you're building something, or you've built something that has that impact.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely say we're building. We're definitely on the journey. But yeah, no, completely. I think it's really frustrating to hear the same stories every day from customers, patients, about the dismissal, the lack of knowledge, how long it takes, the sheer amount of time it takes to get, firstly, in front of the right doctor, but secondly, a diagnosis, and thirdly, the right management is quite
Mm.
astounding. We have a real problem with just really understanding these conditions and how to manage patients in the best way. And that does have a really big impact on women in terms of their mental well-being, their quality of life, their ability to work. I've heard of women, I've spoken to women who took 25 years to get a diagnosis of endometriosis or whatever it might be, polycystic ovary syndrome. And I think in a world where we can diagnose things like diabetes with a blood test and not much,
Mm.
I think that's really quite shocking. So yeah, it's a big motivator for me.
No, yeah, some of those horror stories, it must be nice to know that you're changing that narrative and you're really helping those women. But I mean, it's no, like you say, building. So it's no easy feat to take something from, what is a concept all the way through to a fully fledged platform that's supporting all of these women, providing them with the care that they need. And so, what were some of the early decisions that you made about the type of investment that you would need to get Bloomful, up and running?
Yeah. So I think early on, and I guess, the narrative around startups for the past however long up until recently has really been about VC investment. And it was almost to me like the two things were synonymous. If you wanted to build a startup, automatically you want to make it into this big, machine that generates hundreds of millions of pounds of revenue and is supported by venture capital. So I guess when I started this venture, that I was the same. You'd listen to all these podcasts, and it's like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to build that within this women's health space.
Mm.
If you're someone like me, I'm very ambitious. I want to make sure that the impact I'm having is really big. I think starting this process and going through the process, and certainly going through the funding process, I realized that actually that comes with a lot of its own boundaries. It comes with a lot of additional layers being funded by VC,
Mm.
and you have to really make a call on what type of business you want to run, how big you really are prepared for it to get or want it to get, whether or not you're willing to scale to the type of size that a VC funded company needs to. And I think I discovered quite quickly that yes, those things might be for the future, but for the moment, I want to just, especially being in healthcare where things do go slower, regulations,
Mm.
data protection, I didn't want a VC actually breathing down our necks to move quickly. Some of this, I think, I strongly feel that in some verticals, it's just impossible to go as quickly as perhaps many VCs think. And I don't even know if lots of them realize that in healthcare, it's so hard to just like shoot.
Mm.
It's not, that's where you can get something off the ground fairly quick. And so, we started talking to more angel investors, and realized that, there's a real level of support from angels. And I guess it's a slightly different narrative that you don't get from VCs. And for us, it just felt more accessible, slightly less expectation, perhaps, and slightly more personal relationships, not necessarily with all of them, but with some. And so that felt like the right first step, at least for us to consider. And then, of course, there are non-dilutive ways of getting funding, which is something that probably came slightly later in the journey.
Right. And I mean, angels, again, I think it's a mix between angels and VCs tend to be the two routes that a lot of people talk about, but not necessarily think about the pros and cons of
Mm.
each, because you have to make a call on what is the pain that you want to take with either one of those routes. And what did you find were the benefits and, like, say, the pros and the cons of going down that route of speaking to angels first?
Um, I think some of the cons were definitely that I found it difficult to access really high ticket angels. And so if you just think about it as a numbers game, if you're talking to, I don't know, 20 angels to get one person, or 10 angels to get, even 10 angels to get one person to commit, and that commitment could be anything from £1,000 up to, anything, you end up with more conversations, or at least that's how I felt. I felt like it was perhaps took longer to get the pot of money that we were looking for. However, I did kind of start to realize that there is a bit of a tactic around it as well. There's a bit of a strategy one can take around perhaps looking for very strategically looking for angels that are incredibly well connected, and are perhaps very embedded within the healthcare space or whatever space it is that you need,
Mhm.
and are a good signal to other angels. Because if you can get that person to invest
Yeah.
your ticket, that can kind of unlock a lot more investment. They can make, they can connect you to their angel networks and their kind of peers and friends. They can connect you with, basically they can unlock the door for more money, and that did happen for us. Two or three people in particular who perhaps put in not even necessarily big checks, but they did unlock a lot more money. So I think that's a good strategy to have to kind of overcome that con of it taking a long time to raise angel investment. Um, I think the advantage for us has been that our angels are fantastic. They don't bother us
Mhm.
in so much as, they want to know how things are going, but they're not kind of breathing down your neck to to see that super quick growth that I think VCs obviously need to and want to see. And
Mhm.
like for us, that was perfect because we are not in a sector where you're gonna be able to just click your fingers. Or at least, that's what I've experienced. We're not in a sector where you're able to just click your fingers and immediately it goes. There's a lot of iteration that needs to happen. You need to really understand all the different millions of stakeholders in health tech, um, and really get to grips with who's paying and why and how, and like what's the value proposition for that person, but also all the other stakeholders. So there's a lot of alignment that needs to happen, and it takes time.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's one of those things that requires a lot of patience, a lot of tenacity. But that's a great point about angels unlocking opportunities with other communities because I've heard of a couple of founders say this actually, that it's not actually to do with the size of the angel check, it's more to do with their network and, how much people value that person's opinion. Um,
100%. And I also, to that point, I try when I hear of other people doing fundraisers from angels, and I hear sometimes they're putting a minimum ticket size of perhaps, I don't know, 15,000 or 20,000. And I think, that's fine, but just be aware that you might be sort of eliminating a number of angels that could be really, really beneficial to you. Um, so it's a payoff, it's a trade-off that you need to just be aware of, I think.
yeah, 100%. I mean, I think the almost the rabbit hole that founders can go down is the bigger the ticket size, the quicker it will, the quicker you will close. But that isn't necessarily the case because you need people, like you say, that people trust their opinions. So if you get that person that everybody knows and they've backed you, that's then like a green flag to everybody else. It's like, oh, now that startup's worth me taking a look at.
Yeah, it's a proof point. It's kind of a bit of social proof from your perspective, and so it's kind of de-risking investment for other people if they see that person there. So I think these are all things that you kind of learn as you do it, but if you can
Mm.
get to some of this before you start, then it will make it easier for you.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, Bloomful was also backed by Google Startups Black Founders Fund in 2022, and that is an amazing feat because I can imagine there's hundreds, if not thousands, of founders making applications for that every year. So, how has that had an impact on the business and your ability to fundraise?
Monumental impact. I still remember the day where I was told that we'd got in, and I literally cried because I was just like, I can't believe that we've managed to get through this process.
Mm.
Just, okay, so first of all, it's validation, especially because I was actually going through, it's a very, that was one of the like the first year that we were really operating, and it was very difficult to sort of navigate what we're doing, and I was still on my own. So that was just an amazing bit of validation that what I'm doing is worthwhile and it's actually appreciated by one of the biggest tech giants in the world, if not the biggest. So that was a great tick for me. I think secondly is just the community that I've been able to become part of. I cannot understate how much I love the Google family and community. The other BFF, the other Black Founders Fund founders are just amazing. They are so inspirational. Google are amazing at putting on events. And when I'm around them, like we recently were all in Amsterdam for a few days, you come away just feeling so energized, so full of inspiration, ready to get on with things, and that can't be bought. So that's great. To your point about fundraising, I think it just adds a layer of credibility to what you're doing. Again, it's another proof point for potential investors. If you've got that stamp in your pitch deck, they're automatically thinking, oh well, this is something to at least look at because Google have invested and it's such low odds to get that investment for them. So it definitely catalyzed some people into making an investment. People pay more attention. When you're talking to potential customers, it just adds an extra layer of kudos. So from that perspective, it's been really, really beneficial. And then of course, on top of that, Google, being the enterprise that they are and so huge, they give you a lot of support internally in terms of fundraising, connections to investors, business support itself, many different areas of business. So obviously that helps you to push things forward. It helps you to understand your fundraising approach. It helps you to connect with those investors. So I think all round it's just been a really great thing, and I would encourage any founders who are especially early on to look for those types of initiatives. If you're a woman, take advantage of all the female founder initiatives. If you're of a minority group, take advantage of all of those initiatives, because that's the leg up you need to really be able to push on and push your venture forward.
Yeah, and just having that network to tap into, because more often than not, it's not so much even what you're building or the space that you're in, but the people that you know. And as much as, people want to see certain things, investors want to see a bit of revenue, they want to see that you've got a good team, they want to see that the market is big enough. There are some people that may be willing to take a bet on you, like you said, if you've got that credibility of other people or other institutions that have backed you early on as well.
100%, exactly. People want to see different things. There are no two investors are exactly the same. For some people, they'll see like Innovate UK or Google or whatever, and they'll think, cool, let's do it. Other people will want to see, like you say, revenue traction in other ways. So I think if you can cover as many of those bases as you can, you're putting yourself in a positive position.
Yeah, and as much as the world has changed a lot in terms of fundraising in the past, I'd say 12, 18 months, things have felt very different. But fundamentally, investors are still looking for a lot of the same things. They just may be asking more questions and having slightly higher expectations than they had before, but they still fit under the same category. And I mean, it must be amazing to be a part of the Google family and have that support behind you, all the founders and the people at Google too. And just to circle back to something that you mentioned earlier, a lot of founders do assume that VC is the right path for them. And it isn't always necessarily. Like you said, you made the decision at Bloomful to go for angels first, and maybe in the future work your way to more VCs. But what are some of the alternative methods of fundraising that founders should take into consideration?
So I think probably three that off the top of my head. The first and most important and the best is always going to be revenue from your own customers. I think, again, we kind of forget that this is a business. We're trying to build something that's sustainable, that works, that solves a problem. And like the biggest proof point for that is actually, having an income through revenue. So I think that is always what you should be leading towards. And especially in this current climate, more than ever, we need to be gearing towards a revenue generating business as early as we can. I think second is crowdfunding. You mentioned earlier, maybe before this call, that you were thinking about that. I think crowdfunding is a really interesting option, especially for certain types of businesses. For example, consumer packaged goods businesses, marketplace businesses. I think it helps to build your community. It gives you visibility. I think the downsides are that it can be quite heavy lift. And for me, that's always kind of put me off slightly. Not to mention that you also do need some of it matched, is my understanding, on lots of these platforms. So that's kind of the second one. So for me at Bloomful, the one that I like the most, and the one that we've certainly tapped into the most over this past year, has been grant funding. I would consider grant funding to be the most underestimated, undervalued route of funding for early stage startups. I think if more people understood it, it would probably have a better rep, and perhaps it just all needs rebranding a little bit. But that's been a really important way of us receiving funding over the last couple of years, especially in the last year. And I think, again, there is a strategy to be had around grant funding. I think you can be slapdash about it and just sort of apply for anything and everything, in which case you probably won't get anything. You can get grant writers to do the heavy lifting for you, which has its pros, but also has its cons. It can be expensive. But for me, I think the gold standard has always been to have a strategy around how you're going about getting that grant funding. In terms of, for us, we started with smaller grants. We found smaller ticket grants that we could kind of use as a way to understand what this grant writing process is about. We wrote grants ourselves, we tweaked them, we optimized as much as we could, and we got some of those very smaller grants. And I'm talking about, I think, 5K, 10K here, 50K. You kind of work your way up. And then as you work your way up, you learn what works and what doesn't work. And you keep every single application. So it's kind of you're always sort of improving on the last one. And as you works and what doesn't work, so you can apply that to some of the bigger grants. And I think what that does is it avoids you having to use grant writers, which lots of people do, and that's fine. But then you're not teaching yourself the process, and you're kind of relying on that outside person, which can be expensive, even if they are good. But second, I think, if you can build it within house, if you can understand it in house, that puts you in a much better position to apply for any grant that you want without having to wait for other people's timescales. So yeah, that's worked really well for us. And we've been funded by the National Institute of Health and Care Research. We've been funded by KPMG. KPMG, but I was actually going to say Innovate UK. We won a biomedical catalyst grant earlier this year, and we've put in a couple more this summer. So yeah, I think that's a really, really great step, especially if you're doing something that's really innovative, very impactful, and that's what the government want to spend money on. They want to spend on innovation that's going to have a big impact on the country.
Yeah, and I think grants are definitely not spoken about often enough. And if they are, like you said, it's usually people are thinking about getting a grant writer. What are some things that you've kind of like added to your process to make that easier for you as you've gone along?
Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing is being very intentional about it. So when I say that, I mean at Bloomful we've got very specific kind of work streams that we work on, whether it be kind of the content, comms, and marketing side, and then we've got perhaps technology and product bit, and then you've got these different work streams, and we actually have grants as like an actual work stream, because at any one time we're always either writing grants or actually delivering on the grant, and most of the time it's both of those things. And so every week in our meeting, when we're looking at every different work stream and updating it, we are looking at grants. We're saying, okay, has anything come on our radar that is applicable to us? If so, who's looking at it to see whether we are eligible for that grant? What are the timescales? And is it one that we should apply for? If it is, then it becomes at some point we need to think about what's the project that we're going to put forward, and start to think about how we might start writing it. What's the kind of framework that we're going to use to put this grant application in? And then there's the whole process of actually writing, checking it. It's a process, but you have to be deliberate about it. It can't be a last minute, okay, the grant application is due next week, let's start looking at it now. Like, it's a deliberate process, an intentional process that one has to go through. I think that served us really well. I think the second thing is also just keeping hold of all our grant applications. In our Notion, we have every application that we've ever written since the beginning of Bloomful, really. That's the progress. We can see what we put for the last one. We can lift and shift and then adapt it to whatever the current grant is. So yeah, I think there are definitely untapped resources within grants that people should learn more about.
Yeah, and I mean, grants are in, say, free money, it's equity
Yeah.
free money. People don't think about it in that way, which is you put that effort into those applications, but it's also you then still own your company.
Oh
And I
yeah.
think that's the main thing. And
Yeah.
people should pay more attention to that.
They should, but I will say my one caveat is, whilst it is money that is non-dilutive, i.e., you don't give away any equity, um, they do make you work for it. So it's not just money that you can just spend however. It's very well defined project that you're spending it on. They want to see a breakdown of who are the people you need to deliver on this particular project. What are the resources that are required, what are the overheads that are needed. So it is all done line by line, and you have to prove every month or every quarter that you have spent that money from the grant on that
Mhm.
thing. So there is work to be done. It's not like having just money put into your bank. Often the money is given in monthly in arrears, so you'll get it like every month after you've spent it. So there is still some thinking to be done around it, and it's not just like having a deposit of cash necessarily. But that said, if you're really structured about how you're thinking about the project and it aligns with your kind of business roadmap, then it can work really well for funding that.
No, those are really good things to know because I just don't think people understand the ins and outs of that process of, oh, you can get it in arrears, or even that some of them come with stipulations like you have to have a level of it be matched from other sources of funding as well. I think that might be is that Innovate UK that has that stipulation. So, it's not just a case of, oh, here's a massive grant fund, this would be great for us to apply. It's actually, okay, can we feasibly manage their process and their expectations as well?
Yeah, 100%. And but if you can, then I think you're putting yourself in a great position to firstly be supported by Innovate UK, and there's lots of business support that they actually offer, but also have, like we say, equity free cash that you can use to really drive forward your business.
Yeah, no, that's all really good points, and kind of on what you said earlier that revenue is your source of funding as well. It's really important for I guess founders to double down on that. What you want to do is get to the point that you're making revenue as soon as you can, so that you can start reinvesting that into building the business even more. Um, but there's also kind of a lot for founders to think about in terms of evaluating their business. If somebody says, okay, I've done grant funding, I have angel investors, is VC the best next step? Um, it's taking the time to understand whether their business is right for that path. So how do founders evaluate if what they're building is appropriate for VC backing?
I mean, I think it comes down to how scalable is the solution. Um, do you have the capacity to reach nine figures in revenue
Yeah.
within fairly short space of time? Do you want to reach nine figures in revenue? I mean, I don't think it's as cracked up as it's meant to be. I think that comes with its own problems. So can your business reach that kind of size in the timescale that VCs demand, which is typically 5 to 10 years ish?
Mm.
Do you have the kind of mental, physical, emotional capacity to take that on? And is your business even suitable for it? Frankly, not all businesses can, should, or will reach that kind of scale. So I
Mm.
think there are dimensions across which you can kind of assess. I think there are definitely different verticals and categories that are more, they fit within the category of VC more than others. Fintech, for example, B2B SaaS perhaps. So I think there are loads of considerations, but I think the most important thing is speaking to people, speaking to VCs, not when you're trying to raise, but actually beforehand. What are their expectations? What they need to do from there? They've got their own demands. What is it that they need to be able to do? What is it that makes them invest in a particular company? I'm really like seeking to understand that directly from them is going to be really beneficial. I think for most of them, they need to be able to return the whole fund at least by a company. And so if the fund is 100 million or whatever, then that's the amount that they expect to see from, or they want to have the conviction that you could deliver that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think broadly that's the matrix that you want to be thinking about.
Yeah, then that's really important to remember is that VCs, as much as I feel like they get a rep for being quite ruthless, they
Mm,
are doing a job at the end of the day, and their job is in some ways to make a bet, but to make what they believe to be the best bet possible.
yeah,
So it's kind of being able to convince them that the stars align
yeah.
and that your business looks like, okay, of the 10 founders we're speaking to right now, this one looks like it's the one that we want to bet on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in general, VCs could perhaps do, you know, I have found that lots of them say that they perhaps invest at, say, pre-seed stage or pre-revenue
Yeah.
stage or at concept stage, and you know,
Mhm.
realize that that's not necessarily the case. And so I think there could be much more transparency with what and when VCs will really invest, to avoid wasting people's time.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't take VC calls at the moment. For the most part, 99%, I will just say it's not the right time, um, or perhaps in the future, because it can be a real time sink and energy drain,
Mhm.
and that is critical time that you need to be talking to customers and other stakeholders and really figuring out the product. And I've definitely made that mistake of spending too long talking to VCs when actually it was just never going to be a goer at that time. So I would always implore founders to just, I understand networking, I understand like putting your name out there and meeting people and starting the conversation, but it has to be balanced very strategically with actually just getting on with the business itself.
Yeah, 100%. It's very easy to again go down that rabbit hole of, oh, there's an opportunity to speak to this person. Let me make time for that conversation. As a founder, it's important to learn how to protect your time too.
100%, yeah, because it's very precious, and actually every single day is runway that you're burning through, in some form or other. So yeah, and to that point, grant funding has definitely been helpful in bolstering that and giving us that cushion. Just circle back to this point. So yeah, I think it's something that founders should be cognizant of.
No, 100%. They definitely should. And speaking of, the process of fundraising, it's not easy for anybody, regardless of the stage that the business is at. When you start generating revenue, opening the door to those conversations becomes easier, but it's never easy to necessarily close. So, what challenges did you and your team face as you were raising, and how did you overcome some of them?
I think early on, as with most founders, part of it was just not really understanding the level of time and effort and preparation one needs to do to fundraise successfully. I think probably, slightly less so for angels, but broadly, you need to really understand the ins and outs of what you're doing, where it's going, what's the roadmap. Competitive landscape, is it big enough? You have to know all that stuff really inside out and have a really clear story laid out in your deck, not to mention having all your documents in place, having a data room in place,
Mhm.
like a lot of preparation that goes into it. And I think that was definitely a challenge or a mistake, perhaps very early on, that we weren't fully aware of that. But once we were, that's fine. We get everything prepared. And then I guess the second challenge is for us personally is the women's health challenge. We know
Mm,
health tech is difficult. It's difficult to get funded within, but even more so if you are a female health company for a number of reasons, which intersect with some of the challenges that we are solving at Bloomful, as a business. It's perhaps a sector that some investors are wary of. They haven't seen a big enough return just yet.
mm,
Others, it's that they don't fundamentally understand the problem or the need. I do think that's getting better. But I've definitely spoken to investors where they've said it's niche or it's not something that is required, or should perhaps I'll speak to my girlfriend about that, or uh, and
interesting.
by no means is that everybody. It's definitely a minority, but it does limit your pool still. Like, you have to get over that barrier on top of all the other barriers that you have.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's a challenge. And then of course the final thing is, as we know, the statistics for women and specifically for Black women are very, very disheartening, frankly. And I've always tried very deliberately to not internalize those statistics and to kind of always distance myself. I've always done things and managed to achieve things that, people said was impossible. From medical school to getting into one of the top consulting firms in the world, 1% acceptance rate, I did it. And so I let statistics like that hold me back. And it didn't hold me back because I managed to raise some money. But nevertheless, it can be, if you let it into your head too much, it can kind of cloud what you're doing and distract from what you're doing. So yeah, I think my advice on that part would be to try not to internalize the poor statistics and to be part of the solution, and to prepare your fundraise as much as possible, and to find really succinct ways of explaining what you're doing when it is an industry that people either are wary of or don't understand.
Yeah, no, that's such a big thing, especially for founders that are building in kind of like niche spaces or spaces that, like you say, lots of people may not understand because it's not, the problem isn't their lived experience. Therefore, it's more difficult for them to understand what the product is for and the problem that it's solving. So no, that's all like such great advice. And it would be, I had the joy of watching you and a few other founders pitch last year at an event, and I think by far you were the best pitcher of the night. It was like one of the best. Not that I am an expert in these things, but it was really inspiring to see you on stage and to see somebody that just really understood how to deliver, in every slide. And I think that that's an incredible skill to have as a founder, and it's a necessity for anybody who wants to raise, whether it's from angels, VCs, crowdfunding, or even with grant funding. So what steps did you take to develop your pitch? And what advice do you have for any founders who are struggling with that?
Yeah, I think one, because I have gone through life, I had gone through life before becoming a founder, not realizing that I do have an unfair advantage when it comes to communication. And I've traced this back to the fact that my degree in medicine was heavily communication focused. Not sure if that is still the case in today's medical degrees, but certainly when I was at uni, there was a lot of emphasis on how you communicate with the patient, delivering bad news, breaking good news, making sure that you have pauses and making eye contact and open body language and all of that kind of stuff. And I guess I hadn't really realized how much that had taken hold until I went to BCG, where I was, it was highlighted that I was a good verbal communicator, but it was really hammered home when I started doing pitching, and I, as a founder, and I always, I've had very good feedback from that perspective. So, I always think, how would I teach this to somebody if I was to teach it? And I'm not sure that I've got a complete answer to that just yet, but it's something I will think about. In terms of developing a pitch, I think two things most importantly. Firstly, is to know your stakeholder really well. And obviously, this conversation is about raising capital from investors, but you could be pitching anybody. It could be clients, it could be customers, it could be, like we say, investors, it could be any other type of stakeholder. And I think understanding their view of the world is probably the most important thing, that you can really make sure that you are answering their biggest questions, tailoring your pitch to respond to what they will want to hear. So that's number one. And actually, sorry, even within that, within investors, angels perhaps will want to hear something different to VCs, will want to hear something slightly different to family offices or whatever. So just really trying to tweak that. And then the second thing is, and the most important thing I think, is storytelling and telling a really clear and succinct story with your narrative. Again, it takes time and it takes practice, and there's a bit of an art to it. And I'm not saying I'm an expert by any means, but I think finding a way to really take your problem statement and use that as a driving thread throughout the whole of the pitch, taking your slides as almost as a picture board, telling a story that's cohesive from one slide to the next. I'm not a fan when you have a pitch deck that says like problem, solution, market. I'd like to be able to look at a pitch deck and read the story literally from one slide to the next. So rather than the problem being, rather than it saying the word problem at the top, actually having the the problem stated, if that makes sense.
Mm,
So I think all of these little things help to tell the story, but also just making sure it flows from one slide to the next. Um, yeah, I find it difficult to kind of like portray exactly, but I think there is like some experience. Perhaps I'm not that I'm super experienced, but once you've done it a few times, you start to sort of tailor how it how to make it sound better. I think in answer to your question, yeah, hopefully that answers it. Sorry.
no, no, that does answer the question. I think, especially when people are early days,
Mm,
and it's almost the idea of you know what it means to you, but then it's articulating it to somebody else that knows nothing, or may know nothing. I think that's one of the biggest first hurdles that a lot of founders have to overcome and have to become comfortable with super quickly.
yeah,
So, no, I think that's all really good advice. But even so that you've learned that at medical school, it's good to know that that's something that people can go away and do. People can go away and think like, where can I get information about communication skills? Who can I speak to? Could I get a coach and or a mentor or somebody to help me with this specifically? Knowing that you had those skills, that they were fostered when you were at university, that's a piece of information people can take away and do what they can with.
yeah. I mean, this whole founder journey is a continuous learning journey. So any area that you see a gap, I think it's good to really assess what you can do to fill that gap. If it's within your remit to do so, and as a founder, it's 100% within your remit to sell the vision. I mean, I'm not going to go and learn how to code because I don't need to know how to code, but I will, if I'm not good at pitching, figure out how to do it. And even if you are good at it, really learn to optimize it. I think to your point before, I think there's something about, yes, distilling the message down to really simple terms that anybody can
Mm.
understand. They talk about like, does your granny understand? Like I hear people saying like the granny test or whatever, or the mum test. Would a child be able to understand what it is that you do?
Mm.
Would they go through your slides and kind of piece it together and tell some sort of cohesive story? I mean, I think if you put it down to that level and the answer is yes, then I think that's a good start. I think it's practice though, to be honest, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, practice just makes you feel more comfortable going through it over and over and over again. To the point that you should just be able to go through it in your sleep, basically. You
Always.
want to get to that point.
No, always. I mean, you laugh, but I never ever pitch on stage unless I know the pitch off the top of my head, because I don't want to rely. I'm not somebody that wants to look at cards. I don't want to look at the screen. I
Um,
always script, but I try and deliver it like it's not a script.
mm,
Pitch it in front of my children before I leave in the evening. I'll be the person that's been going over it and over and over it in my mind. I'll have it written out word for word in my Notion. I'll be looking at it on the
mm,
train. So I really believe in being that level of prepared, because
yeah,
that's how it across like you are seamlessly kind of very natural with it. That's
yeah,
the
yeah,
only natural is if you're super prepared in that way.
yeah. And memorizing it plays a huge role. I would never have known, having seen you on stage, that you'd memorized, like that. Obviously, people have their cues,
Mm,
but it felt like it was very much like you just flow through everything so seamlessly. I would not have known that had like been
fully
partially
memorized.
scripted.
I fully memorized in my mind, but that's the secret. That's how you now make it look and sound like it's very easy and it's just a conversation, because you've got every single thing in mind. That's what
Mm,
works for me especially when I'm pitching in front of a crowd. I mean, I think if you're pitching one to one or remotely, I think it's, perhaps slightly different. But certainly if
yeah.
you're pitching that environment, I think you can help yourself a lot by just really knowing your pitch inside out.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, that's all I say. Great advice, especially for people early stage. A lot of people get nervous about it. And had I known half of those things when I started, I probably would have done better in the first few. So, and but just to finish up, so last question: if you could go back and do it all again, would you do anything differently? And if so, what?
Um, yes, I would do a lot differently. Are we talking specifically about fundraising or about the business in general?
Oh, um, How about one thing from each? One thing you would go back and do differently for fundraising, one thing for the business.
Yes. So as with everybody, I fell into the trap of talking to investors too early. I would have canned that altogether. I would have focused massively on the business, and that actually leads into the second thing, which is really focusing on product, falling in love with product from the outset, falling in love with a proper, really stringent and structured product process that you can take week by week to really push your product forward. And I think linked to that is finding ways to generate revenue from early on. Now we're all kind of aware that we need to be revenue generating early, but there was a time when it was just users at all costs, get growth at all costs, don't worry about revenue generation. I think that we've definitely, those days are 100% behind us, and
Mhm.
I would focus heavily on getting a product that users want to use, that people want to use and want to pay for. And there is something about actually, I think, building something that people need. Also, not building something that people need, building something that they actually want. Because if you're building something that they want, then they will hand money over for it, whether that be
Mhm.
as businesses, insurance companies, the NHS, whatever. So yeah, I think that would be how I would move things if I was to go back.
That's all again like super valuable advice, and I'm sure there'll be founders who are in a similar position to you who agree that they would have changed those two things as well. But I think part of the journey is being able to look back and say, oh, I'd do that differently if I'm crazy enough to do it a second time. then, then I know better for next time.
Well, this is it, and I think that's why it's important to do podcasts like this, and I do try and make time for it because I think we learn quicker if we learn from people that have kind of done it. And I should also say that I'm by no means an authority or an expert, but I am going through the journey and sort of taking my learnings as I come, and I'm always happy to feed them back to people that are a step behind.
Yeah, but I mean, it's even, what is it that makes somebody an authority or an expert? You've done it. And I think and you've done it successfully. There's so few people that close around, for those who have, you've done something that 90% of people haven't been able to do. So in that sense, I would say that makes you more than qualified to share
Yeah,
anything that you've learned along the way.
I agree. I agree.
But no, but thank you so, so much, Dupe, for all of your advice today. It's been, well, one, it's gone by quickly. But two, it's been great to hear more about your journey, where Bloomful is, and to just get all of your advice to help so many founders that are tuning in and listening. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been great. I've loved the conversation, and yeah, looking forward to listening to it back.
But also a big thank you to everybody who's listened all the way through to the end. We will have links to Dupe so that you can find her on social media, so you can take a look at Bloomful, any of the resources that she mentioned during the chat. We'll also have links to those in the newsletter for those who are interested. And, if you know a founder or somebody who's an aspiring founder that would find this useful, then please do share it with them. The more people we reach, the more people we can help. And the main thing with this podcast is we want to help as many founders as we possibly can. So again, a huge, huge thank you to Dupe, and also a big thank you to everyone that's listening. And we'll see you on the next episode.